Stand in front of the Colosseum in Rome, and one thing becomes obvious very quickly. The most famous arena in the ancient world is not all there. One side still rises in those great stacked arches that have become a symbol of Rome itself. The other side looks as if history reached down and tore a massive bite out of it. So what happened? How did the greatest amphitheater of the Roman world end up as half a monument? For nearly 500 years, the Colosseum was the stage on which Rome showed itself. What Rome believed it was, emperors paid for spectacles meant to astonish the city, wild animals brought from the edges of the known world, criminals forced into deadly mythological performances, and gladiators fighting in the sand before tens of thousands of spectators. At its height, the scale could be almost hard to believe. When Trajan celebrated his victory in Dacia, the games reportedly lasted 123 days. Thousands of gladiators fought. Thousands of animals died. The Colosseum was not simply a building. It was imperial power turned into theater. But buildings, like empires, age. The Colosseum was repaired many times during its working life. In the early 3rd century, a major fire destroyed the upper seating deck, and it took 5 years to restore the structure. Even today, signs of hurried repair can still be seen along parts of the north wall. Then, during the 5th century, earthquakes damaged the arena again. This time, Rome no longer had the same wealth, confidence, or political stability to keep restoring it to its old glory. The spectacles also changed. The early empire could afford extravagance. Later emperors had fewer resources and more urgent problems. They spent less time in Rome, less money on public games, and more energy trying to hold the empire together. Exotic animals became harder to obtain. Gladiators became expensive. The whole machinery of blood and spectacle began to slow. Eventually, the gladiatorial combats stopped. A later legend tells of a monk who leapt into the arena to stop a fight, only to be killed by the enraged crowd. Supposedly, the emperor heard of this and ended the games. It is a powerful story, but reality was probably less dramatic. Christian disapproval certainly mattered, but so did a simpler fact. The emperors were no longer paying for the old shows. The beast hunts lasted longer. In fact, they outlived the Western Roman Empire itself. The last recorded hunts in the Colosseum were held in 523, under the rulers who had replaced the Roman emperors in Italy. After that, the arena's original purpose faded. Then came one of the strangest parts of the story. People forgot what the Colosseum had been for. Medieval Romans knew they were looking at something enormous and ancient, but not always what kind of something. Some imagined it had been a temple of the sun, perhaps crowned by a great golden dome. Others thought it had been a temple to all the gods, with a giant statue of Jupiter standing in the arena. The most colorful stories involved the poet Virgil, who medieval legend transformed into a magician. In those tales, Virgil built the Colosseum with the help of demons and used it for necromancy. That sounds absurd now, but it tells us something important. By the Middle Ages, the Colosseum was already a ruin. Its meaning had become as broken as its walls. Nature did part of the damage. Earthquakes were a constant threat to such a tall masonry structure, and the Colosseum had a particular weakness built into the ground beneath it. On the north side, its heavy concrete foundations reached down to solid bedrock. On the south side, they rested on wetter, less stable sediment. When earthquakes shook Rome, that unstable ground amplified the force. Over time, the southern half suffered far more damage than the northern half. But the Colosseum's greatest destroyers were not earthquakes. They were Romans. The arena was made from valuable materials. Its walls used travertine, a handsome limestone. Its seats included marble. To medieval builders, this was not a sacred ruin. It was a convenient supply yard. The stones could be reused in new buildings or burned in kilns to make lime for mortar. Piece by piece, cart by cart, the Colosseum was harvested. This began early and continued for more than 1,000 years. The building was not only a quarry. For much of the Middle Ages, it was also a neighborhood. People lived inside its vaults and passageways. There were houses with small courtyards and gardens. There were shops, storage spaces, stables, churches, and at one point even a fortified palace. The ruins of imperial entertainment became a place where ordinary people worked, prayed, slept, traded, and survived. And here is the detail that makes the story almost too perfect. Many of the people living in the Colosseum were lime burners. They spent their days tearing apart the very building in which they lived. Then, in 1349, a major earthquake brought down the entire southern circuit wall. The collapse created a huge mound of broken stone. Romans called it the Colosseum's thigh, and for centuries that heap helped build Renaissance Rome. In 1452 alone, one contractor carried away more than 2,500 cartloads of stone. After all that fire, earthquake, neglect, and pillaging, the real surprise is not that half the Colosseum disappeared. The surprise is that any of it survived. The northern side survived for two main reasons. First, geology had treated it more kindly. Its foundation was stronger, so it resisted earthquake damage better. Second, and perhaps more unexpectedly, the popes helped preserve it. The north side of the Colosseum faced the ceremonial route between the Lateran Palace and the Vatican. For papal processions, that great ancient wall made a powerful backdrop. Not every pope valued it, and as late as the 16th century, Pope Pius V considered demolishing what remained. But most of the time, the papacy's interest in Rome's monumental landscape helped protect the surviving portion. So the short answer is this: half the Colosseum vanished because earthquakes weakened it, and Romans mined it for stone. The other half survived because it stood on firmer ground and became useful as a symbol. But the fuller answer is better. The Colosseum was an arena, then a ruin, then a mystery, then a quarry, then a neighborhood, then a backdrop, and finally a monument. Its missing half is not just an absence. It is evidence of empire, poverty, memory, reuse, neglect, faith, vanity, and survival. That is why the broken Colosseum may be more interesting than a perfect one. A complete Colosseum would tell us about Roman entertainment. The ruined Colosseum tells us what happened after the show was over. And that history deserves to be remembered.